Hello and welcome to Mental Health. It's a Trap. We're your hosts, Susan and Stephen, mother and son, unraveling the complexities of the mental health traps people fall in. Join us on this podcast journey as we demystify the mental health labyrinth, explore common issues, and provide you with tools to navigate this sometimes extremely daunting terrain. You can expect engaging conversations, personal stories, and probably also have a laugh or two. Access to mental health care should not be what causes you additional stress. We invite you to follow along, and together we can embrace the darkness. Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to touch a little bit more on cognitive behavioral therapy, often noted as CBT, and we're also going to touch a little more on TEAM-CBT, which was created by Dr. David Burns, and he actually had studied under, now my brain is blanking on the person who does CBT, Dr. Beck. Dr. Beck, who created CBT. Dr. Burns had worked under him and went on to create this version that is a little more specific. And I think if you think about it, it seems like it could be time consuming. So then, we're kind of getting into our thoughts of like, oh, this sounds like it's a lot of work for the therapist, because the T is for testing. And so Dr. Burns wanted to create something that would show the effectiveness on whether therapy was or wasn't working, not based on the person saying, oh yeah, my therapist is great. They're really great at listening and it's awesome, versus them just being nice because they don't want to be rude or mean. So they just say they're nice.
Okay. Yeah, so that's interesting because it's not really measurable, right? In terms of when you say, oh, well, my therapist listens really well. Well, that's not really why you're going to therapy. You're going to therapy to make changes in your life or improve things or manage symptoms, whatever the reasons are. And it's great that you can have a therapeutic relationship, though what are the outcome measurements? How do we know that what you're doing with your therapist is actually working?
Yeah, and that's a good thought right there, right? Even as you said that, like it's like, why are people going to therapy? You would assume they're going to therapy for change, right? Or oftentimes to feel better. I would say it's definitely they don't want to be where they are. And when we think about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and just our thought process, sometimes people don't know why they're going to therapy.
Right.
So someone listening is great because then they've never had that. So it creates a different way to process of being supported. But I want to say that's like the basic level of providing therapy is being able to hold space and be non-judgmental and be where the person is, versus sometimes I've met with someone who was like, oh yeah, this new person, they're a clinician supervisor and they came from the jail and they're, a hard butt. And it seems like they don't have empathy. And yet when you think about coming from the prison world, doing clinical work there, it's a lot different than doing it in other fields.
Right. Yeah. And, and I think that in terms of that piece about just the basis of going to therapy, and it's great to be able to have a supportive person who listens well and has empathy, which will tie into your next one. Also looking at people don't go to therapy to just vent and hear themselves talk. So how do you measure that if that's all they're doing?
Yeah. And that's the hard part because I know people who do. I have heard people say they go and they use it as a vent session, and they're very aware that they're just talking and the therapist is listening, and how that's not really creating the change that sometimes not even that they want, right? People don't necessarily know what they want. So it's that very gray nuance area where it's like they're the therapist, the professional, the person who has the problem is the expert in their life, but they're looking for the therapist to kind of tell them what to do. But the therapist is looking for them to find it on their own, plant seeds. So it's like,
And how do you bridge that, right? So you do have those two things in the same space, and how do you bridge that? So it's really the collaborative approach, right, of being able to work together to identify the goals and what the objectives look like towards those goals. So you can have a goal, like someone's goal may be, I want to stop drinking. The objective is not just stop drinking. How do they get to that goal, and what are the steps? So the objectives are actually the steps to get to the goal.
And that's an important thing because I don't think they really teach that in grad school, right?
No.
And I think this is very helpful for therapists, whether they're new or they've been in the field for a while. Because I think even as therapists, there are times where you get stuck in it could be financial, right? If you're starting a business and you're new, or maybe you move and you're trying to get new clients, like it can be difficult to make a living. And so that could be one thing that gets in the way of, terminating with your client or patient because they're just kind of, they've done the work and they don't need that support, or maybe they need a different therapist, or they need to work on a different issue and you're not the best provider for that. And so it can be a very stuck place for some people. Because again, like I hear people like, oh yeah, like I just talk and vent. And it's like, and I think that hurts us a little bit because they're like, oh, if you're a therapist, that's like just paying a friend. And it's like, no, it's not.
Right. If you want to just vent and again, I think there's space in a therapy session to allow someone to vent, and then so part of the CBT model, right? So the venting is happening. What are we going to do? Like, what is the area of control that you have? What is it that you're really trying to work on in order to not be stuck or just paying someone to vent? You might as well just sit on a park bench and vent away for free.
Yeah, exactly.
Like get a few stairs.
So the testing too it's short. I mean, it can always be adapted. So it's not necessarily like you have to ask all these questions. However, they have, Dr. Burns created a brief mood survey. And the one that I'm looking at right now has about 28 questions. And they're scaled from 0 to 4. And some are 0 to 6. So the main questions are, how depressed do you feel right now? And then it has 5 different other questions underneath that, again, 0 to 4. And there's a before the session and after the session. Then there are questions on suicidal urges. How anxious do you feel right now? How angry do you feel right now? Happiness questions, and then relationship satisfaction. So depending on what you're looking at, if you're not really concerned about, relationship issues, then you probably won't have to ask those questions, which would make it about 23 questions to answer. And it should only take a couple minutes for them to do it before the session and after. And so that kind of gives the therapist an idea, as well as the person, of how therapy is either helping or not helping. And if it's not helping, it's another way to give the therapist an idea of how to move forward. So the next step after T for testing is E for empathy. And so that's another way that they get tested. So it's like, did I feel heard or validated by my therapist or not, right? And a quick thing before, if you have any thoughts, is even if a perfect score is 20, if you get a 19 in Dr. Burns' eyes, it's still a failure. And the reason for that is because there's always room for improvement. And so there is a way to get from, even if you never get from 19 to 20, understanding and asking the person if there was a point in the session where they didn't feel like the therapist understood them, or they weren't empathetic, or maybe they just got it a little bit wrong. It gives the therapist a way to dive deeper into that, even if it's for the next session, but a way to connect with them so that, again, it makes it feel like they're heard and validated, which is the point of empathy, which I would hope all therapists would have those qualities.
I agree. Otherwise, then they will not be having a lot of clients. So as you were talking about that, it made me think about a patient that I am currently working with. Struggles with anxiety and like moderate alcohol use. And so I had a session with this patient a couple of weeks ago, and is in a relationship, and the person is much older than her, and her parents are really struggling and don't really know that she's actually in the relationships, thinking it's just a friend thing. And so, being able to be open and comfortable to share that, right? So we kind of talked about some things around that. And so when she came in just recently, she said, I really struggled after our last appointment. And I said, okay, let's talk about it. And I gave her the space to be able to talk about it and be able to express, what came up for her. And it was really all around, I'm not ready yet. I'm not there yet to have any conversations. And I said, okay, so we're going to pull back and we're going to, work on you. So trying to help her build her own inner self-confidence. And, so being able to listen and to own it, right? So maybe I was further ahead than the patient and didn't recognize it. And so, again, it's that not saying that she didn't feel supported, though ultimately that really was what was happening. I wasn't in the same space, and when you're not in the same space, it can be harmful, if it continues. And so I was really grateful that they were able to say that, and then at the end of the appointment, I said, so how are you feeling now? How did today go? And we did a lot of board work on the whiteboard, and so it was really cool. We used the beef stew and the CRS model. And, and so, yeah, I think it's just being able to own our stuff and really be in the space where the client or patient might be at.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a big thing in terms of how comfortable people feel with a therapist or professionals, even, if you move outside of that, how when someone is able to say what they're thinking can be a big step in whether it's like their healing or their growth, because people don't always feel comfortable or safe, and they don't say what they're thinking, or they don't say, oh, I'm uncomfortable, or I didn't like that, or you hurt me when you said that, or communication skills that you would think people would have, but they don't, because they're stuck in their thoughts and their experiences that they've had, whether they've gotten lashed out at or gotten attacked, or if they get like minimized or like gaslit, like they're the problem. then it
Mm-hmm.
could be very hard for them to speak what they're feeling with someone they don't necessarily know.
And so as I'm thinking more about it, I thought that to me showed progress in the individual because there was advocacy for self, right? And the hope is that down the road she will be able to take that advocacy and use it in her personal life to be able to say what she needs to say and live her life the way she wants and not have it dictated by what others think.
Mm-hmm. And that's the process.
Oh, yes, it is.
And one of the other things too with testing is that, again, the therapist gets tested too at the end. And so there's an evaluation for the therapist. And again, that kind of helps. So I think also maybe it's a horrible session. And again, you don't know that. And even if they leave, you never know that. However, getting tested in terms of how the client or patient thought, the therapist was doing in the session, it gives the therapist an opportunity to, repair that, or again, to kind of acknowledge like, oh, okay, well, I see like, maybe I said some things that didn't sit well with you. Is that something that you feel comfortable talking at the next session? And usually it's more quick, again, depending on how deep they get into it or what issues came up. So there's testing. Empathy. A is for agenda setting. And so one of the things that I feel that has been unique, at least in the terms of the podcast and listening to Dr. Burns, is that he gets very specific. And so someone might have a few different goals why they are in therapy. However, in terms of like agenda setting, it usually is one thing. So he gets like very specific with the clients, and right now I don't think he's licensed anymore, as I believe he is in his 80s. However, he still has the podcast, and there is also the Feeling Good Institute. So if people are looking for resources on where to go to get more information, and then his website is feelinggood.com. And he recently released his second book edition. The first one is the Feeling Good, and then for the book is Feeling Good, and the second one is Feeling Great. And so he kind of does talk about TEAM-CBT and how it's done. So, therapy is not always an affordable option. And, the disclaimer is my mother and I do not have sponsors, and these are just resources that we like to share because books are often more affordable. So there's also probably the audiobook, which is at a lesser cost. And then there's, again, the podcast that has roughly over, or at least about 400 episodes, and they go over different topics of grief and loss, relationship issues, addictions, depression, anxiety, and a whole lot of other stuff, where he even does live sessions. So he takes you through what it looks like to do TEAM-CBT. And he also has points in the podcast where he gives feedback on pause this podcast and write this down so that he can take you through the exercise, or again, kind of helping people to better understand the TEAM-CBT model. And then M is for methods, and that's when they get into more of the techniques, and there are a bunch of them. So one of the great things that we're doing here on our podcast is to kind of educate you more. However, it's not for you to be the expert, so you don't have to worry about remembering all this. However, it could be helpful just to have a better understanding. So some of the methods are compassion-based, which they have the double standard technique. So it's almost like you go in, you tell them about your problem, and then you kind of put the shoe on as if you were talking to someone who is exactly like you, grew up like you, went to the same school, had the same experiences or similar experiences, but they're not you. It's almost like if you were talking to your friend, how would you talk to them? So again, trying to help people to talk better to themselves, which they can sometimes often do when they're thinking about how I would say this to a friend. You wouldn't say you're a crap, you're a worthless friend. You would say, no, you're not. You're loving, you're caring. These are the things that I like about you. And so sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, right? Because when you think about when you talk with a friend, that's what they say.
Right.
But it's not always helpful. Like it's nice, but then it's like, if it doesn't work, then now what?
Mm-hmm. Huh.
And let's see, they have a bunch of different ones. Examine the evidence. So sometimes it's just kind of going into the thoughts. Like, is it is it true or is it untrue? Like, because if we say that we're worthless, then what's the evidence that says that we're worthless, and then what's the evidence that says that we're not? He also has devil's advocate technique, which I'm going to say it's probably similar to double standard technique. A lot of them are probably close. Not well. I guess I shouldn't say they're the same because there's a lot of them. But I think even in therapy, again, there's like a theme that a lot of what therapists do are similar, and people are creating something to make it more specific to work and help them out. They
Right.
also,
When I hear, oh, go ahead.
you can go.
When I hear devil's advocate, I've mentioned that in sessions before to patients, in terms of, and I relate to it more about, kind of challenging thoughts or challenging emotions, right? In a respectful and gentle way. And, because sometimes when you're stuck in a space, you can't see beyond that space. And so that, looking at other perspectives and opportunities is not something that you can see. So, I'll say, I'm the devil's advocate. So, and then whatever it is that we're working on, I get to challenge it a bit. And then you can see the wheels turning as they're thinking about it. And they go, I never thought of it that way, in terms of irrational thoughts or emotions, and how feelings just are. One thing I learned in Compassion Friends, feelings just are. They're not right or wrong. So yeah, I think that's it can be helpful to know too.
Yeah, and one of the other things that he talks a lot about, especially in the podcast, is his 5 secrets of effective communication, and it kind of does talk about the different, as they call them, distortions, negative thoughts, is like black or white, all or nothing, and I think there's 10 to 15 other ones that I can't think of the top of my head, but just different ways of the shoulds, like I should this, I should that.
Catastrophic, there's
Overgeneralizing.
Yes. And so, they're really unhealthy ways or patterns of thinking. And, if you don't know any better, that's what you use until you learn something new.
Mm-hmm. I heard someone say that, how oftentimes people say practice makes perfect.
I've heard the saying.
Well,
I don't agree with it.
Someone that I met said practice makes permanent. So if you practice wrong or you practice imperfectly, it still makes it permanent. So when you have thoughts or behaviors, if you have those repetitive habits, those repetitive thoughts, those repetitive behaviors, then it becomes permanent. It becomes the thing that you do, the thing that you become, the thing that you're content with, versus being able to challenge it and change it, which, won't happen overnight because you've thought a certain way or you've been a certain way for years, decades, however long. And maybe it doesn't take that long to change it. However, it does take repetitiveness to grow out of it.
Mm-hmm. I did hear a saying, and I can't think of what it is off the top of my head. It was the 3 Ps: process, practice, progress, maybe? Which sounds similar to what you're kind of talking about, though I don't recall the order in which. I don't know if that's something we had talked about or if I heard it somewhere else. So I just think that's interesting that that's kind of popping in my head, and I can't recall where I heard it from. So,
Yeah, but I think it speaks to one of the reasons why people get stuck in content. It's because they just are stuck in routines and habits, all or nothing thinking. Like, oh, I'm not a runner. Like, I say that all the time, but there have been times where I've enjoyed running, but I always say I'm not a runner. I say that I hate running. Do I really hate running? Yes and no. Like, if you get into a good rhythm, sometimes it's breathing. Like, we're talking about breath work. Like, if you're not breathing, there are breathing techniques to do on your running, but you're not taught that. So it's easy to hate something because it's hard on the body and it's hard to breathe and you feel like crap.
right. And so I think just being able to figure those parts out. So it's not that, well, I guess people do hate some things, though it's more about, it's just not for me, which is a very different, again, hits the brain very differently versus like, I can't. And so, okay, the more you tell yourself you can't, you never will.
Yeah. I mean, I would also, devil's advocate, I would say it's not for me is the same thing. It's just a gentler way, right? Oh, reading's not for me. Oh, this isn't for me. And it's like, okay, like I can say the same thing. Like the last book that I read was The Body Keeps the Score. And it was the first book that I remember picking up and read in like 2 days. But I'm always like, I'm not a reader. I love audiobooks because it's easier, it's simpler. It's thought. It's like, oh, I'm a slow reader. Like reading takes forever. Those are the thoughts that I don't always think about, but it's so much easier to say, I'm not a reader or I don't like reading, which if the book is good, there have been a couple of books that I've read that were good. Everything else, it's like, oh, I don't like reading. I don't like running. It's like people say, I don't like working out because it's, for most people, it's not fun. So it's like, ugh, I have to get up. I have to get dressed. I have to go to the gym. I don't know anybody here. People are looking at me. I'm going to look stupid. I'm going to look dumb. I'm going to look like I don't know what I'm doing. They might be saying, I'm fat. I'm ugly. These people are in shape. They're good looking, right? All of these thoughts that are in their head that are preventing them from, doing something that could help with their like health and wellness. Like it's not about being buff. It's not about being a bodybuilder. And we all know that, health is a part of health is our physical and mental activity. So if we're not moving, it's a lot easier for like our bodies and our minds to kind of not be as healthy.
Not move.
Mm-hmm.
They just won't move, and so I think that words play a significant role in the way we think about things and how we feel about things. And so it's not about being politically correct. It's just more about when the brain hears negative words, it starts to feel negative feelings, right? And so being able to, that whole can't, try, and can thing, right? So it's about trying. And it might not be your favorite pastime to read, though it doesn't mean you don't like reading. Or I don't like to work out, though you might like walking. So you are kind of working out in a different way. So it's really all about words and language and being intentionally aware of those things.
Mm-hmm. And that's the hard part because it's so easy to be stuck and feel good.
Exactly.
So that is just a brief little overview of Team CBT, testing, empathy, agenda setting, and methods. If anyone is interested in it, I would, again, definitely encourage, at the very least, the podcast, because it's free. It goes over, again, the method itself, as well as the different practices. And again, he highly talks about the 5 secrets of effective communication. And so sometimes that's just a great skill to learn, because he teaches you on his process of how to communicate with people and help to kind of, if you feel like you're always arguing or you're getting stuck or like people don't listen to you, he gives those tips on, again, effective communication. And we're not always taught that, as well as a bunch of other different things. Again, topics like depression, anxiety, addictions and substance use, relationship issues, grief and loss, and a bunch of others. He does live sessions. And then again, he has his books and different resources and his website, feelinggood.com. If you have any questions, any comments, or any thoughts, we would love to hear what you thought. If you want more information, let us know, and take care.